A savage winter storm tore through the neighborhood on the coldest night of the year. In a small, weathered house at the edge of the forgotten streets, Zola was fighting a losing battle with a dying furnace, no money for repairs, and her 5-year-old son Jasper trembling under every blanket she owned. Suddenly, there was a desperate crash outside. A massive figure appeared at her door, a lost Hell's Angel, bleeding, covered in tattoos, and barely conscious. Though every instinct screamed danger, something in his broken eyes made her open the door. She pulled him inside and began cleaning his wounds in her bright yellow kitchen. She had no idea that when his gaze fell upon a faded photograph on her refrigerator, he would freeze in stunned recognition, realizing this house held the answer to a guilt he'd carried for 20 years. His arrival would summon not just his vengeful brothers to her doorstep, but force them both to confront a buried past that would either destroy them or forge an unbreakable bond that would change 3 lives forever. Thanks for being here. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's unforgettable story. The digital clock on the thrift store microwave blinked 2:33 inches the morning when Zola Harper finally let herself exhale. Her rough, work-worn hands moved mechanically as she sorted the loose coins scattered across the laminate kitchen counter. $12.67. That was all that separated her son Jasper from another week of stretched meals and watered-down juice. Zola pressed her fingertips against her temples, feeling the familiar throb of exhaustion pulse behind her eyes. At 30 years old, her reflection in the darkened window showed someone who'd lived twice that long. Her rich brown skin, once radiant, now carried the dull exhaustion of someone who'd worked double shifts at the warehouse just to keep the lights on. The small house groaned and settled around her, each creak a reminder of how fragile her sanctuary truly was. Jasper slept soundly on the living room couch, wrapped in the rainbow quilt she'd sewn from fabric scraps. The heat in his bedroom had sputtered out 3 days ago, and the repair estimate sat like a weight in her pocket. $340 she simply didn't have, so she kept him close, near the space heater she'd positioned at a careful distance, where she could watch his small chest rise and fall with each innocent breath. He had no idea his mother was drowning in past due notices and impossible choices. The house stood isolated at the dead end of Chambers Street, separated from the other homes by an overgrown, empty lot nobody bothered to maintain. It was as if the neighborhood had deliberately pushed her to the margins, the same way the world always had. The families in the renovated houses 2 blocks over never made eye contact. When they noticed her at all, it was with tight smiles that never reached their eyes or hushed conversations that died the moment she approached. But inside these walls, Zola had created something different. She'd painted the kitchen a defiant sunshine yellow. She'd hung Jasper's crayon drawings with care. She'd planted wildflowers in coffee cans on the windowsill. Every bright color, every deliberate touch of warmth was her rebellion against the cold indifference outside. This was her fortress, her island, the one place where violence and chaos and the ghosts of her past couldn't reach her son. She'd learned long ago that the outside world brought nothing but pain. 6 years ago, her older brother Marcus had opened their door to someone he trusted, someone from the neighborhood who'd smiled and called him brother, before putting a bullet in his chest over $300 and a perceived slight. Zola had been the one to find him, bleeding out on their mother's porch, his life draining away while she screamed for help that came too late. Since then, her philosophy had been simple and absolute. Trust no one. Let no one in. Keep the chaos outside where it belonged. Build the walls high and keep them locked. She'd succeeded for 6 years, but tonight, the storm that had been building all day finally broke with savage fury. Wind shrieked against the windows, snow fell in blinding horizontal sheets, and somewhere in the darkness beyond her door, an engine coughed, sputtered, and died with a mechanical death rattle that cut through the howling wind. Then came the sound that would shatter everything. A heavy, desperate crash against her front door. Not a knock, a collapse. Zola's entire body went rigid. Her hand instinctively moved toward the kitchen drawer where she kept the knife. Every muscle in her body screamed the same message her brother's death had taught her. Don't open that door. Don't ever open that door. But then she heard it. A low, agonized groan. The sound of someone dying. Zola's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Jasper, still sleeping peacefully, unaware. She looked at the door. Every survival instinct she'd honed over 6 years of self-imposed isolation told her to stay inside, call 911, let someone else handle it. But her feet moved anyway. She crept toward the door, gripping the knife, and peered through the frosted window. What she saw made her blood run cold. A mountain of a man lay crumpled on her porch, his massive frame barely fitting on the narrow wooden planks. He was dressed in a leather jacket covered in patches she recognized from the news Hell's Angels insignia. His arms were sleeved in tattoos that disappeared under blood-soaked fabric. His weathered, bearded face was pale beneath the grime and the gray. But it was his eyes barely open, unfocused, that stopped her. They weren't the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of someone who'd already given up. "Don't do it," her rational mind screamed. "He's dangerous. He's everything you've kept out. He'll bring violence. He'll bring death. He'll destroy everything you've built." But her hand was already turning the deadbolt, because somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the armor she'd built, Zola recognized that look. She'd seen it in the mirror after her brother died. The look of someone who had nowhere left to go. The look of someone who'd been cast out into the cold to die alone. The door swung open, and the winter storm howled into her home, bringing with it a man who would reveal a secret she never knew existed and change all three of their lives forever. Zola Harper had learned to measure time in shifts. Morning shift at the warehouse, 4 a.m. to noon. Afternoon shift cleaning offices downtown, 1 to 6. Evening shift, the most important one, belonged entirely to Jasper. That was the shift where she became fully human again, where the exhaustion melted away the moment her 5-year-old son wrapped his small arms around her neck and told her about the pictures he'd drawn or the new word he'd learned. Tonight, she'd come home to find him already asleep on Mrs. Chen's couch next door, clutching his worn stuffed elephant. The elderly woman had watched him without complaint, as she did 3 times a week, refusing payment Zola couldn't afford anyway. Zola had carried Jasper home through the bitter cold, his warm weight against her chest, the only thing keeping her upright. Now he slept on their living room couch while she moved through her evening ritual with mechanical precision. Lock the door, check the lock, check it again, draw the curtains tight against the darkness outside. Turn on every light in the main room so Jasper would wake to brightness, not shadows. Arrange his breakfast bowl and spoon on the counter for morning. Fold his clothes. Check the lock one more time. The house was small enough that she could see every corner from where she stood. That was intentional. That was necessary. After Marcus died on their mother's porch 6 years ago, bleeding out while strangers stepped over him to get inside, Zola had made herself a promise. She would build a world so small, so controlled, that nothing dangerous could ever slip through the cracks. No unexpected visitors, no new friends, no risks. Just her and Jasper and these 4 walls painted in defiant colors that refused to surrender to the gray decay pressing in from outside. She'd chosen this house specifically for its isolation. Dead-end street, empty lot on one side, an elderly couple who kept to themselves on the other. The families in the nicer section 2 blocks over had their book clubs and their neighborhood watch meetings that somehow never included her address. That suited her fine. She didn't need community. Community was where people let their guard down. Community was where trust got you killed. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows with increasing violence. Zola glanced at the weather alert on her phone. Winter storm warning, heavy snow, dangerous conditions. She checked the pantry, enough food for 3 days if she stretched it. Checked the space heater still working, still keeping Jasper warm. Checked the lock again. Everything was secure. Everything was controlled. Outside, the storm descended like a living thing, turning the world beyond her windows into a white void. The streetlight at the corner flickered once, twice, then died completely. Darkness swallowed Chambers Street whole. Zola pulled her threadbare sweater tighter and watched the snow fall. Somewhere in the distance, barely audible over the howling wind, she heard the sound of an engine struggling against the cold. It sputtered, coughed, then fell silent. She told herself it was nothing, just someone passing through. Just the storm playing tricks with sound. She checked the lock one final time and turned away from the door, determined to ignore whatever was happening out there in the darkness where she'd sworn never to look again. Stryker Reed had been riding for 32 hours straight when his bike finally betrayed him. The engine had been coughing for the last 20 miles, spitting black smoke and making sounds that told him the machine was dying. He'd pushed it anyway. his gloved hands frozen to the handlebars, driven by something more powerful than mechanical failure, the absolute certainty that if he stopped moving, Deacon would find him. And Deacon didn't leave loose ends breathing. The betrayal had been simple in execution, devastating in consequence. 3 nights ago, Deacon had ordered a hit on a civilian Marcus Chen, an accountant who'd witnessed a gun deal during a chapter run through Louisville. The man had seen faces, heard names, could identify members. Stryker had been given the assignment because he was reliable. 23 years in the club, never questioned an order, never hesitated when the work got ugly. He was the chapter's ghost, the one they sent when problems needed to disappear permanently. But when Stryker had tracked Chen down to a suburban grocery store parking lot and watched him lift his 6-year-old daughter onto his shoulders, laughing as she pointed at Christmas lights strung across the storefront, something inside him had cracked. Or maybe it had finally healed after being broken for 2 decades. Either way, he'd walked up to Chen in the parking lot, close enough that the man had frozen in terror, and whispered 4 words: "Run. Tonight. Don't stop." Deacon had security footage from 3 different angles by morning. The Hells Angels didn't forgive internal betrayal. They didn't debate it or offer second chances. And they sure as hell didn't let decorated members walk away with 23 years of chapter secrets rattling around in their heads. Stryker knew exactly what would happen when they caught him. They'd make it slow. They'd make it hurt. They'd make it a lesson for anyone else who thought mercy was an option. His only advantage had been a 6-hour head start and a bike that knew how to eat highway miles. He'd ridden through Ohio, Michigan, and into whatever godforsaken city this was. Road signs had become meaningless hours ago. He'd ditched his phone, his wallet, anything that could track. He was running on fumes and instinct and the fading hope that distance might buy him time to disappear. That hope died on Chambers Street. His bike gave one final, rattling gasp and went silent. The sudden quiet was worse than the engine noise had been. Stryker coasted to the curb and sat there in the howling storm, watching his breath crystallize in the air. His body was shutting down. The knife wound he'd gotten at a truck stop outside Cleveland. 2 prospects from a rival chapter who'd recognized his colors and thought they'd earn respect by taking him down had soaked through the makeshift bandage hours ago. His leather cut, the vest that had been his identity for more than 2 decades, was stiff with frozen blood. The Hells Angels insignia on his back felt like a target now instead of armor. He was 42 years old, 6'4", built like a man who'd spent his life working with his hands and his fists. His arms were sleeved in tattoos that told the story of every run, every brother lost, every sin committed, skulls and flames and eagles, names of the dead, dates that meant something once. His face was weathered and bearded, lined with the kind of hard living that aged a man in dog years. Gray streaked through his hair. Scars crossed his knuckles. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd chosen violence as a way of life and was now paying the bill in full. Stryker abandoned the bike and stumbled forward into the storm. His vision was narrowing, edges going dark, hypothermia, blood loss, exhaustion. Pick your poison. They were all killing him at the same speed. Houses materialized out of the white chaos, dark and lifeless. He tried to climb one porch, but his legs buckled. He hit the railing hard and went down. Get up. Keep moving. If you stop, you're dead. He forced himself upright and staggered down the street. Through the blinding snow, he saw light. A single house at the dead end. Yellow glow bleeding through the windows like a beacon. It looked impossibly warm. Impossibly safe, like something from a life he'd walked away from before he'd learned what warmth and safety even meant. Stryker made it to the porch. His legs quit. He crashed against the door with his full weight, the sound like thunder in the quiet street. Inside, he heard a child's voice. A woman responding, sharp with fear. He tried to speak, to call out that he needed help, but his voice came out as nothing more than a broken rasp. He pressed his face against the cold wood and waited, already knowing he didn't deserve mercy, but praying for it anyway, because sometimes even monsters remember how to pray. The sound that shattered Zola's carefully controlled world wasn't a knock. It was a collapse. The entire door shook in its frame, followed by a low, agonized groan that cut through the howling wind like a blade. Zola's body went rigid. Her hand moved instinctively toward the kitchen drawer where she kept the knife, the same knife she'd held the night Marcus died. Too late to save him, just in time to cut the phone cord when the stranger who killed him had come back looking for witnesses. Mama? Jasper's voice, small and confused, came from the couch. He was sitting up, clutching his stuffed elephant, his eyes wide in the dim light. Stay there, baby, Zola said, her voice tight. Don't move. Another sound from outside, not a groan this time. A word, barely human, rasped through what sounded like a throat full of broken glass. Please. Every instinct Zola had spent 6 years honing screamed at her to stay inside. Call 911. Let professionals handle it. Let someone else open that door. Her brother had opened a door for someone he trusted, and it had gotten him killed. She'd sworn she would never make the same mistake. She'd built her entire life around that promise. But her feet were already moving toward the door. She grabbed the knife from the drawer and approached slowly, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Through the frosted window, she could see a massive shape slumped against the wood, too big, too much. The kind of size that meant violence, that meant danger, that meant everything she'd been running from. Zola, don't. She said her own name out loud, trying to stop herself, but her hand was already on the deadbolt. She turned it slowly, clicked open the second lock, put her hand on the doorknob. This is how you die, a voice in her head whispered. This is how you make Jasper an orphan. This is how everything ends. She opened the door anyway. The storm roared in, bringing with it a blast of frigid air and swirling snow. And there, crumpled on her porch like a fallen monument, was the biggest man she'd ever seen. He was enormous, easily 6.5 feet, built like he'd been carved from stone and violence. His leather vest was covered in patches she recognized from news reports about motorcycle gangs. Hell's Angels. His arms were completely covered in tattoos, intricate sleeves of skulls and flames and symbols she didn't understand. His face was bearded, weathered, scarred. Gray streaked through his dark hair. He looked like something out of a nightmare, like the physical manifestation of every reason she'd taught herself to never trust strangers. But it was his eyes that stopped her from slamming the door shut. They were barely open, unfocused, glazed with pain and cold, but in them she saw something she recognized. Something that cut through the terror and the tattoos and the sheer intimidating mass of him. She saw someone who had already given up, someone who expected nothing, someone who was dying and knew it and had made peace with it. She'd seen that look before, in the mirror. The night after Marcus died. Help, he managed, the word barely audible. Then his eyes rolled back and his head hit the porch with a sickening thud. Blood. There was blood everywhere. His shirt was soaked with it, frozen against his skin. A wound on his side, deep and ugly, still seeping. His hands were blue-white with frostbite. His lips had no color at all. He was dying, right now, on her porch. If she closed this door, he would be dead within the hour. Mama? Jasper's voice again, closer now. He'd gotten off the couch. Stay back, Jasper. Zola's command came out sharper than she intended. She looked at her son, standing there in his dinosaur pajamas, his elephant tucked under one arm. 5 years old, innocent, safe. Everything she'd fought to protect. Then she looked at the man bleeding out on her threshold. Someone's son once. Someone's brother, maybe. Definitely someone's nightmare now, judging by the way he'd arrived running from something, fleeing into a storm that should have killed him. Every rational thought told her to close the door. He was dangerous. He was gang-affiliated. He would bring violence into her home, into Jasper's life, into the sanctuary she'd built brick by brick and locked door by locked door. This was exactly the kind of outside chaos she'd sworn to keep away from her son. But standing there, with the storm screaming and her child watching and this broken man dying at her feet, Zola realized something that terrified her more than any of it. She couldn't let him die. Not because he deserved saving, not because it was safe, but because some part of her, some deep maternal instinct that had kept her fighting when everything else had told her to quit, couldn't watch someone bleed out on her doorstep and do nothing. Marcus had died while people stepped over him, while neighbors who knew his name closed their curtains and pretended not to see. She'd been the only one who tried to save him, and she'd been too late. She wouldn't be too late this time. Jasper, go to your room and close the door, Zola said quietly. But Mama, now, baby, please. She waited until she heard his bedroom door click shut. Then she looked down at the man who'd crashed into her life like a falling star. She took a breath, made a choice, stepped over a line she could never uncross. Zola grabbed him under his massive arms and pulled with everything she had. He barely moved. She tried again, dragging him inch by inch across the threshold. He was dead weight, and he must have weighed close to 250 pounds. But fear and adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she had. She got him inside, closed the door, locked it, and as she stood there, breathing hard, looking at the enormous, tattooed, bleeding stranger now lying on her living room floor, Zola Harper realized she'd just invited the very thing she'd spent 6 years keeping out. She'd invited the world back in. Zola worked quickly, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd patched up enough scraped knees and split lips to know the basics. She dragged the man into the kitchen where the light was brightest, where she could see the full extent of what she'd brought into her home. It was worse than she'd thought. The knife wound in his side was deep, still oozing blood despite the cold that should have slowed the bleeding. His skin was pale, almost gray. His breathing was shallow and ragged. She pressed towels against the wound, watching them turn red almost instantly. She'd need more than kitchen supplies for this. She'd need actual medical help. But calling 911 meant questions. Questions meant police. Police meant putting Jasper in the middle of something she didn't understand. And this man, whoever he was, whatever he'd done, had clearly been running from something when he'd collapsed on her porch. So she did what she could. She heated water on the stove, found the first aid kit she kept under the sink, grabbed the bottle of rubbing alcohol she used to clean Jasper's scrapes. Her hands shook as she cut away the man's blood-soaked shirt, revealing not just the wound, but a landscape of old scars and new bruises that told a story of a life lived violently. The tattoos were intricate, almost beautiful in their detail. A massive eagle spread across his chest, names and dates down his ribs, symbols she didn't recognize wrapping around his biceps, and on his forearm, partially hidden by blood, what looked like a faded memorial piece, a woman's face surrounded by roses, with dates that suggested she'd died young. Zola pressed the alcohol-soaked cloth against the wound. The man jerked, his eyes flying open with a gasp that became a groan. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. "Easy," Zola said, her voice firm despite the fear coursing through her. "I'm trying to help you. You need to stay still." His grip loosened. His eyes, dark and unfocused, tried to make sense of where he was. She watched awareness creep back into them, slowly confusion, then fear, then something else. Resignation, maybe. Acceptance. "Don't move," she repeated. "You're hurt bad. I'm cleaning the wound." He nodded slightly, his jaw clenched against the pain. She went back to work, flushing the wound, applying pressure, doing everything she could remember from the basic first aid course she'd taken years ago when Jasper was born. The bleeding was slowing. That was good. But he needed stitches. Probably antibiotics. Definitely more help than she could provide. She was wrapping gauze around his torso when she noticed his eyes had fixed on something behind her. His entire body had gone rigid. His breathing stopped mid-inhale. The look on his face had shifted from pain to something else entirely. Shock. Recognition. Horror. Zola turned to follow his gaze. He was staring at her refrigerator, at the collection of photos and drawings held up by magnets, Jasper's artwork, a photo of her mother, a picture from Jasper's last birthday, and there, in the corner, faded and curling at the edges, was an old photograph she barely looked at anymore because it hurt too much. It was from 23 years ago, a summer barbecue in the backyard of her childhood home. Her mother, young and smiling. Her brother Marcus, maybe 13 years old, grinning at the camera. And next to Marcus, arms slung around his shoulders, was another boy, white kid, maybe 14, all skinny limbs and crooked smile. They were wearing matching Detroit Tigers caps and holding up fishing poles, clearly proud of some catch they'd made. She'd kept the photo because it was one of the few pictures where Marcus looked truly happy, before the streets got hold of him, before the violence found their door, before everything fell apart. The man on her kitchen floor was staring at that photo like he'd seen a ghost. "That's..." His voice came out broken, barely more than a whisper. "That's me." Zola looked at the photo again, at the skinny white kid with the crooked smile, then back at the massive, tattooed man bleeding on her floor. The age was right. 23 years would make him about the right age. But the transformation was so complete, so total, that it seemed impossible they could be the same person. "Marcus," the man whispered, his eyes still locked on the photo. "Marcus Williams. We were..." He stopped, his face contorting with something that looked like physical pain but wasn't from the knife wound. "We were best friends. Before everything." Zola's blood went cold. She looked at the photo again, trying to see the connection, trying to remember the white kid who used to come around their house, who Marcus would disappear with for hours, riding bikes and getting into the kind of harmless trouble kids got into before the world taught them about real trouble. Ryan? The name came out of her mouth before she'd consciously remembered it. Ryan Reed? The man Stryker closed his eyes, and something like grief crossed his face. Nobody's called me that in 20 years. You were at the funeral, Zola said slowly, the memory surfacing like something dredged up from deep water. Marcus's funeral. I saw you in the back. You didn't come to the repast. You just disappeared. I couldn't face your mother, he said quietly. Couldn't face you. I was all ready. He gestured vaguely at himself, at the cuts and the tattoos and the violence written into his skin. I was already gone by then. Already lost. Marcus tried to pull me back, but I wouldn't listen, and then he died, and He opened his eyes and looked at her directly for the first time, really looked at her, and Zola saw recognition settle fully over his features. You're the little sister, he said. You used to follow us around. You were maybe 7, 8, 7. Zola confirmed, her voice hollow. They stared at each other in the bright yellow kitchen. The boy who'd been her brother's best friend. The man who'd become everything Marcus had fought to avoid becoming. The ghost from a past neither of them could escape. And Zola realized that saving him was no longer just an act of mercy. It was confronting a piece of Marcus she thought she'd buried 6 years ago. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Stryker Ryan, whatever his name was, now closed his eyes and turned his face away from the photograph. His jaw worked like he was trying to say something, but no words came. Just shame, written so clearly across his weathered features that Zola felt it like a physical presence in her kitchen. She finished wrapping the gauze around his torso, with mechanical movements, her mind spinning. This man had been Marcus's best friend, had sat at their mother's table, had been family, once, and then he'd vanished into whatever darkness had carved him into this scarred, tattooed stranger bleeding on her floor. How did you get the knife wound? Zola asked finally, her voice cold and clinical. Stryker's eyes opened but didn't meet hers. Truck stop, Cleveland. 2 guys recognized my colors. Your colors? He gestured weakly at the leather vest she'd cut away, crumpled in the corner. The Hell's Angels insignia. I'm trying to leave. They didn't want me to. Who didn't? My chapter. He stopped, grimacing. The people I rode with. Rode with, Zola repeated. That's one way to put it. Another way would be to say you're in a gang. A violent gang. The kind that makes the news when someone gets killed. He didn't argue. Couldn't argue. The evidence was written all over him. And now they're chasing you, Zola continued, her voice hardening. Which means you brought them here. To my home. To my son. I didn't know where I was going, Stryker said quietly. I just ran. The bike died here. I didn't know this was your house. Didn't know you were even in this city. But now you do know. Now you're here. And now I need to know exactly what kind of danger I just invited inside. She crossed her arms, standing over him. Who's coming for you? His name is Deacon. He's the chapter leader. If he finds me. Stryker's face went even paler. He won't just kill me. He'll make an example. And anyone who helped me. Anyone who got in the way. He looked at her directly now, and she saw genuine fear in his eyes. You need to call the police. Tell them I broke in. Tell them you were scared. Get me out of here before he tracks me down. Mama? A small voice from the doorway made them both freeze. Jasper stood there in his dinosaur pajamas, his elephant clutched tight, his wide eyes fixed on the enormous man lying on their kitchen floor. He should have been asleep, should have stayed in his room, but of course, he hadn't. 5-year-olds were curious about everything, especially giant strangers in their homes. Jasper, I told you to stay in your room, Zola said, moving quickly to position herself between her son and Stryker. Is he hurt? Jasper asked, peering around her legs. Is there lots of blood? He's hurt, baby, but I'm fixing him. You need to go back to bed. Can I help? Jasper took a step closer, completely unafraid in the way only children could be. I'm good at helping. I can get bandages. Stryker had gone completely still, his eyes fixed on Jasper with an expression Zola couldn't quite read. Horror, maybe, or recognition of something he'd lost. He stared at the boy like he was looking at a ghost. What's your name? Jasper asked, tilting his head. Stryker's mouth opened, closed. No sound came out. His name is... He's just visiting, Zola said quickly, scooping Jasper up despite his protests. "And he needs to rest. Come on, baby. Let's get you back to bed." "But I want to." "Jasper, bed, now." She carried him back to his room, tucked him in tight, and waited until his eyes closed before returning to the kitchen. When she came back, Stryker was sitting up, his back against the cabinet, his face buried in his hands. "He looks like Marcus," he said without looking up. "Same eyes. Same way of tilting his head when he's curious." "Don't," Zola said sharply. "Don't you dare talk about my brother. Don't you dare compare my son to him." "Marcus was good," Stryker continued, as if he hadn't heard her. "Better than me. Better than anyone I knew. He tried to keep me out of trouble. Tried to tell me the streets would eat me alive. But I thought I knew better. Thought I was tough. Thought I could handle it." He laughed, a bitter sound. "Look how that turned out." "Why did you leave?" Zola asked. "After the funeral, why did you just disappear?" "Because I couldn't face what I'd become. Couldn't stand in front of your mother and pretend I was still the kid who used to fish with her son. By then, I'd already been jumped into the club, already had blood on my hands. Already knew I was too far gone to come back." He finally looked at her. "Marcus died trying to stay clean. Died because he wouldn't join a crew, wouldn't carry a gun, wouldn't play the game. And there I was, doing everything he'd refused to do. How could I face your family after that?" Zola wanted to scream at him, wanted to throw him out into the storm, wanted to erase the last hour and go back to her safe, controlled life where the past stayed buried and strangers stayed outside where they belonged. But she couldn't, because he was right about one thing. He was hurt, he was being hunted, and if she threw him out now, she'd be sending him to his death. Just like the neighbors who'd closed their curtains when Marcus was bleeding on the porch. "You can stay until morning," she said finally. "Until the storm passes, then you leave. And you never come back here. You never bring your past to my door again." Stryker nodded slowly, his eyes closing in relief or exhaustion or both. "And if anyone comes looking for you," Zola added, her voice cold as the storm outside, "you better pray they don't find you here." 300 miles away, in a roadside motel outside Pittsburgh, Deacon Cross sat in the dark and studied the map spread across the stained bedspread. He'd been tracking Stryker for 36 hours, following a trail of abandoned gas stations, surveillance footage, and the kind of desperate moves a man made when he knew death was riding his tail. Deacon was 53, lean and hard as cordwood, with silver hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and eyes that had seen enough violence to be comfortable with it. He'd built the Iron Saints chapter from nothing, turned it into one of the most feared operations in the Midwest, and he'd done it by following one simple rule: loyalty was absolute, and betrayal was paid for in blood. Stryker had been his best enforcer. 23 years of service, never questioned an order, never hesitated when the work got ugly. Deacon had trusted him the way you trusted a weapon completely, because it had never failed before. But weapons could malfunction, and when they did, you destroyed them before they could be used against you. The civilian Marcus Chen should have been simple, a witness to a gun deal, a loose end that needed tying off. Stryker had done that kind of work 100 times, but something had changed. Something had broken in him. He'd let the target walk, had actively warned him to run, and in doing so had compromised the entire chapter. The security footage from the grocery store parking lot had been damning. Stryker approaching Chen, leaning in close, speaking to him for less than 30 seconds, Chen's face going white with terror, then understanding. The man had grabbed his daughter and disappeared within the hour. By morning, he'd vanished completely, along with whatever testimony he could provide to federal investigators. That betrayal alone would have earned Stryker a bullet. But the real problem was everything Stryker knew. 2 decades of chapter business. Names, locations, deals, bodies. He was a walking federal case. And if he decided to trade information for protection, the entire operation would collapse. Deacon had put out the word immediately. Find Stryker Reed. Bring him back alive if possible. Dead if necessary. Either way, make it clear what happened to brothers who forgot where their loyalty belonged. The tracker, a wiry man named Silas, who'd spent 10 years as a bounty hunter before joining the club, had picked up the trail in Cleveland. A fight at a truck stop, 2 prospects from a rival chapter left bleeding, and a witness who'd seen a big man matching Stryker's description ride off heading north. From there, it was just following the blood. Silas had called an hour ago with the location, a dead-end street in a forgotten neighborhood, Stryker's bike abandoned at the curb, no sign of the rider but tracks leading to a small house at the end of the block. Deacon looked at his phone, at the address Silas had sent. He committed it to memory, then deleted the message. He'd ride out at first light, give Stryker one chance to come back voluntarily, to face justice from the brothers he'd betrayed. If he refused and Deacon suspected he would, then they'd handle it the hard way. The hard way was what Deacon did best. He thought about Stryker, about the kid who'd joined the club at 19, all rage and broken home and nowhere else to go. Deacon had shaped him, trained him, turned him into a weapon the club could use, and for 23 years, that investment had paid off. But something had changed. Maybe it was age, maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was whatever weakness had let him see a target as a father instead of a problem to solve. Either way, the Stryker he'd known was gone, replaced by a liability that needed eliminating. Deacon stood and walked to the window. The storm was finally breaking, the snow tapering off to scattered flurries. By morning, the roads would be passable. By afternoon, he'd be at that address. And this problem would be solved one way or another. He pulled out his phone and made one more call. "Crow," he said when the line picked up. "Get the bike ready. We ride at dawn." Back in Zola's kitchen, Stryker had fallen into an uneasy sleep, his back against the cabinet, his breathing shallow but steady. Zola sat at the table, watching him, the knife still within reach. She couldn't sleep, couldn't let her guard down, not with this stranger, this ghost from Marcus's past bleeding on her floor. The storm had quieted outside, the wind dying to a whisper. In the sudden silence, she heard something that made her blood run cold. A motorcycle engine, distant but distinct, not the broken cough of a dying bike, but the deep, powerful rumble of a machine built for highways and long hunts. It was far away, maybe miles, but in the dead quiet of the early morning, sound carried. The engine revved once, twice, then fell silent. Stryker's eyes snapped open. Even half-conscious, even wounded and exhausted, he recognized that sound, his face drained of what little color it had regained. "That's him," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's Deacon's bike." Zola's hand moved to the knife. "How far?" "Far enough that we have time. Not far enough that running matters." Stryker tried to stand, grimaced, and fell back against the cabinet. "You need to call the police, right now. Tell them I'm here. Tell them." "And what happens when the police come?" Zola cut him off. "What happens when they find a Hell's Angel bleeding in my kitchen? When they start asking questions about why I didn't call immediately? When Child Services decides maybe this isn't a safe environment for Jasper?" Stryker stared at her, understanding dawning across his face. She'd made a choice when she pulled him inside, a choice that had consequences she was only now beginning to understand. The distant rumble of the motorcycle engine started again, closer this time, and then faded into the darkness. Hunting. Dawn came gray and cold. The storm's aftermath, leaving the world outside wrapped in silence. Zola hadn't slept. She'd sat at the kitchen table all night, the knife in her lap, watching Stryker drift in and out of consciousness. Every sound made her flinch. Every creak of the house settling made her hand tighten on the handle. Jasper was still asleep. That was the only mercy. Stryker woke fully as pale light filtered through the window. He looked worse in daylight, the bruises darker, the cuts more vicious, the exhaustion carved so deep into his face that he seemed ancient. He pushed himself upright with a groan, his hand pressed against the bandaged wound on his side. "You need to know something," he said, his voice rough. "Before Deacon gets here, before this gets worse, you need to know the truth about Marcus." Zola's entire body went rigid. "What about Marcus?" Stryker closed his eyes, his jaw working like the words were physically painful to form. "The night he died. The man who shot him. I knew him." The knife was in Zola's hand before she'd consciously decided to pick it up. "What did you just say?" "His name was Terrence Polk. We called him T-Bone. He was a prospect in my chapter, trying to earn his patch. He'd been dealing on the corner near your mother's house. And Marcus," Stryker's voice cracked, "Marcus saw him selling to a kid, 14-year-old kid. Marcus confronted him, told him to get away from the neighborhood, told him he'd call the police if he didn't leave." Zola's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the knife. "Keep talking." "T-Bone came back 3 nights later. Came to your mother's house to teach Marcus a lesson about respect, about not interfering in club business." Stryker opened his eyes, and they were filled with something worse than shame. "I knew he was going. I heard him talking about it at the clubhouse, talking about how he was going to handle that uppity knee." He stopped, unable to finish the word. "I heard him say exactly what he planned to do. And you didn't stop him?" Zola's voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't stop him," Stryker confirmed. "I was too much of a coward, too afraid of what the brothers would think if I protected someone outside the club, too worried about my own standing. So I let him go, let him ride to your mother's house, let him put a bullet in your brother's chest over $300 and wounded pride." The kitchen tilted. Zola gripped the edge of the table, trying to breathe, trying to process what she was hearing. "You knew he was going to kill Marcus, and you did nothing. I told myself it would just be a beating, told myself T-Bone was all talk, told myself Marcus would be fine." Stryker's face contorted. "I told myself a lot of lies that night, and when I heard what happened, when I heard Marcus was dead, I couldn't. I couldn't face what I'd done, couldn't face that I'd let it happen." "That's why you were at the funeral," Zola said, her voice hollow. "That's why you stood in the back. That's why you disappeared. I wanted to confess, wanted to tell your mother everything, but I was too much of a coward for that too." He looked at her directly. "I've been a coward my whole life, Zola. Every choice I made, every time it mattered, I chose wrong. I chose the club over Marcus. I chose silence over truth. I chose my own skin over doing what was right. Get out!" The words came out cold and final. "Zola, get out of my house. Right now. Before I call the police myself and tell them everything." Stryker didn't move. "I can't. You can and you will. I don't care if Deacon finds you. I don't care if you die in the street. You let my brother die. You stood by and let it happen. And then you had the audacity to show up at his funeral like you cared." Tears were streaming down Zola's face now, hot and angry. "You're not staying here another minute. If I leave, Deacon will find me within the hour, and when he does, he'll know someone helped me. He'll track it back here. To you. To Jasper." Stryker's voice was steady despite the devastation on his face. "I can't protect you if I'm dead. I don't want your protection. I want you gone. I know." Stryker pulled himself fully upright, wincing with pain. "I know you do. And you have every right to throw me out. Every right to hate me. Every right to let Deacon finish what T-Bone started 20 years ago." He met her eyes. "But I'm not leaving. Not while there's a threat coming to this house. Not while Jasper is in danger because of me." "You don't get to play hero now," Zola spat. "You don't get to pretend you care about my family after what you did." "I'm not pretending, and I'm not playing hero." Stryker's voice dropped to something raw and honest. "I can't bring Marcus back. Can't undo what I let happen. Can't make up for 20 years of being exactly the kind of man he tried to keep me from becoming. But I can stand between Deacon and this house. I can make sure what happened to Marcus doesn't happen to you. You think that makes it right? You think protecting us now erases what you did?" "No," Stryker said simply. "Nothing makes it right. Nothing erases it. But I'm done being a coward. I'm done choosing wrong. Even if you hate me, even if I die doing it, I'm not walking away from the only family Marcus ever had." Zola stared at him. This ghost from her brother's past. This man who'd let Marcus die and now claimed he'd die to protect them. She wanted to scream. Wanted to hurt him the way he'd hurt her family. Wanted to erase the last 12 hours and go back to her safe, controlled life where the past stayed buried. But outside, somewhere in the gray morning light, a hunter was circling closer. And whether she wanted his protection or not, Stryker was the only thing standing between Deacon and her son. They came at 10 in the morning, when the street was quiet and the neighbors were at work. 2 motorcycles, their engines cutting through the silence like chainsaws. The sound made Zola's blood turn to ice. Stryker was on his feet instantly, moving to the window despite the pain that made him hunch over. He pulled the curtain back just enough to see. "It's them," he said quietly. "Deacon and Crow." "How many?" Zola's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she moved toward Jasper's room. 2. "For now." Stryker turned to face her. "Get Jasper into the bathroom. Lock the door. Don't come out no matter what you hear." Zola didn't argue. She ran to Jasper's room, scooped her sleepy son into her arms, and carried him to the small bathroom at the end of the hall. "We're playing a game, baby," she whispered, setting him in the bathtub. "A quiet game. You have to stay here and not make any sound. Can you do that for Mama?" Jasper, still half asleep, nodded and clutched his elephant tighter. Zola kissed his forehead, locked the door from the inside, and positioned herself between the door and her son, the knife gripped in her hand. The knock on the front door was almost polite. 3 measured raps. Through the thin walls, Zola heard Stryker's voice. "Deacon, I'll come out. Just leave the house alone." A different voice responded, cold and measured. "You know I can't do that, brother. You know how this works. You made your choice when you let that civilian walk. Now you face the consequences. The woman and kid have nothing to do with this. That so?" The voice Deacon carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. "Then why are you in their house? Why'd you bring our business to their door? Seems to me you involved them the moment you knocked." A pause. Then the sound of wood splintering as the front door crashed inward. Zola pressed her back against the bathroom door, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would break through her ribs. She heard boots on her floor, multiple sets, heavy, deliberate. "Nice place," Deacon's voice, closer now. "Lot of kid drawings on the fridge. Sweet, real domestic. That what you wanted, Stryker? Play house with some woman and her kid? Pretend you're not what you are." "I'm not going back." Stryker's voice was strained. "You want me, take me, but you leave them out of it." "Oh, I intend to take you. Question is whether you come voluntarily or whether we have to motivate you." A pause. "Crow, go check the back rooms. See if our hosts are home." Footsteps moving down the hallway, getting closer to the bathroom. Zola tightened her grip on the knife, positioning herself in front of the tub where Jasper sat frozen, his eyes wide with the kind of fear children feel when they know something is terribly wrong. The footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. The handle rattled. "Locked," a rough voice called out. "Someone's in here." "Well, well," Deacon said, his voice carrying down the hall. "Looks like we do have company. Stryker, you want to tell your friend to open the door? Or should Crow kick it in?" "Don't touch that door." Stryker's voice had changed, dropped into something dangerous. "I'm warning you, Deacon." "You're warning me?" Deacon laughed, a sound without humor. "Brother, you seem to have forgotten how this works. You don't give warnings. You don't make demands. You betrayed the club. You put every one of us at risk. And now you're going to pay for that. The only question is how many people get hurt along the way." Through the door, Zola heard a scuffle, the sound of flesh hitting flesh, something heavy hitting the floor. Stryker, gasping in pain. "Still got that knife wound, don't you?" Deacon's voice was conversational. "Bet that hurts. Bet it hurts real bad when I do this." Stryker's groan of agony made Zola's stomach turn. "Now, let's talk terms," Deacon continued. "You come back with us. You face the brothers. You take your punishment. In exchange, we leave this house standing. We leave the woman and her kid alone. They forget they ever saw you, and we forget they ever helped you. How do I know you'll keep your word?" Stryker managed through gritted teeth. "You don't, but it's the only deal on the table. You can take it, or Crow can kick in that bathroom door, and we'll see what kind of motivation you really need." A pause, loaded with threat. "I'm betting the woman has a kid in there with her. I'm betting that kid is exactly the kind of leverage that'll make you real cooperative." Silence. Then Stryker's voice, broken and defeated. "Let them go, please. I'll do whatever you want. Just let them go." "That's what I thought." Zola could hear the smile in Deacon's voice. "See, you're still a brother where it counts. You still know how to make the right choice when something matters. Crow, step away from the door. Stryker's coming with us voluntarily." "What about the woman?" Crow asked. "She's seen our faces, heard our names." Deacon's voice went cold. "That's a problem that needs solving." "No!" Stryker's shout was desperate. "You promised. I come with you, they go free. That was the deal. The deal was I leave the house standing. Didn't say anything about leaving witnesses." The sound of a gun being cocked echoed through the small house. "Now, let's see who's behind that bathroom door. Let's see what kind of person you thought was worth throwing your life away for." Zola looked down at Jasper, his small face pale with terror, his elephant clutched so tight his knuckles were white. She thought about Marcus, bleeding out on a porch while people looked the other way. She thought about 6 years of building walls to keep danger out, only to have it crash through anyway. She thought about the knife in her hand, and the locked door, and the choice she had to make. And she realized that sometimes sanctuary wasn't about keeping the world out. Sometimes it was about deciding what you'd fight for when the world broke in anyway. The bathroom door exploded inward as Crow's boot connected with the lock. Zola raised the knife, positioning herself between the massive biker and Jasper, ready to fight with everything she had. But before Crow could take a step inside, Stryker crashed into him from behind, driving him into the doorframe with enough force to crack the wood. Despite his injuries, despite the blood seeping through his bandages, Stryker fought like a man with nothing left to lose. "Run!" he shouted to Zola. "Take Jasper and run!" But there was nowhere to run. Deacon blocked the hallway, gun in hand, watching the fight with cold calculation. Zola clutched Jasper tighter, trapped between the violence in front of her and the armed man behind. Stryker and Crow grappled in the narrow hallway, all raw power and desperate fury. Crow was younger, stronger, uninjured. But Stryker fought with something beyond physical strength. 23 years of guilt and shame channeled into protecting the one thing that mattered. He drove Crow back, landed a brutal punch that sent the man staggering. Then Deacon fired a shot into the ceiling. The explosion of sound froze everyone. Plaster dust rained down. Jasper screamed and buried his face against Zola's chest. "Enough," Deacon said calmly. The gun now pointed at Jasper. "Next one goes in the kid. Your choice, Stryker." Stryker stopped, his chest heaving, blood running from his reopened wound. He raised his hands slowly, his eyes never leaving the gun pointed at the child. "Smart," Deacon said. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me where you stashed the ledger, the real one, with all the names and dates and deals from the last 5 years, the one you took as insurance before you ran." Stryker's face went pale. "I don't have it." "Wrong answer." Deacon's finger moved to the trigger. "I know you took it. I know you planned this. You took our insurance policy thinking it would keep you safe. So where is it?" The hallway was silent except for Jasper's muffled sobs against Zola's chest. Stryker looked at Zola, at the child in her arms, at the fear in her eyes. Then he looked back at Deacon. "Storage unit," he said quietly. "Cleveland. Unit 447 at the secure store on Euclid Avenue. Keys in my bike. Hidden compartment under the seat." Deacon smiled, a cold, satisfied expression. "See, that wasn't so hard. Crow, go check the bike." Crow limped past them, glaring at Stryker with murder in his eyes. They listened to him exit through the broken front door, heard the sound of metal scraping. A moment later, he returned, holding a small key. "Got it," Crow confirmed. "Good." Deacon lowered the gun slightly but didn't holster it. "Here's the new deal. Brother, that ledger buys you your life. We get it back. You get to keep breathing. But you're out. Permanently. You leave this city. You disappear. And if I ever see you again, if you ever come near another chapter member, if you ever even think about talking to the feds, I will find you, and I will end you. And then I'll come back here and finish what I started today." "They forget everything they saw here," Stryker said, his voice hoarse. "They forget you, forget me, forget all of it. As long as they keep their mouths shut, they get to keep living their quiet little lives." Deacon looked at Zola directly for the first time. "You never saw us. You never heard our names. Your friend here crashed his bike in the storm and you helped him out of the goodness of your heart. That's the story. You tell any other version, I'll know. And I'll come back." Zola nodded, unable to speak, holding Jasper so tight she was probably hurting him. Deacon holstered his gun and looked at Stryker one last time. "You were a good brother once, best enforcer I ever had, but you went soft. You forgot who you were." He turned toward the door, Crow following. "Don't make me regret letting you live." They left the way they came, their boots heavy on Zola's floor, their engines roaring to life outside. The sound faded slowly, swallowed by the morning quiet, until finally there was nothing but silence. Stryker collapsed against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. His bandages were soaked through, his face gray with blood loss and exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Zola stood frozen for a long moment, Jasper still clinging to her. Then she carried her son to his bedroom, tucked him in, and whispered that everything was okay, that the bad men were gone, that he was safe. She stayed until his breathing steadied, until the fear left his small face. When she returned to the hallway, Stryker was barely conscious. Without a word, she helped him back to the kitchen, back to the bright yellow walls and the faded photograph on the fridge. She cleaned his wounds again, changed his bandages, forced him to drink water. "You should go," she said finally. "Like he said, leave the city, disappear." "I will," Stryker said, "when I'm strong enough to ride, when I'm sure they're really gone." 3 days passed, then a week, then 2. Stryker slept on the couch, recovering slowly. During the day, when Jasper was at Mrs. Chen's and Zola was at work, he started fixing things. The broken heater in Jasper's room, the loose step on the porch, the crack in the kitchen wall. Small repairs, silent acts of contrition. Zola came home each evening to find something else mended, something else made whole. She didn't thank him, didn't speak to him more than necessary, but she stopped telling him to leave. Weeks became months. Stryker found work at a body shop 2 neighborhoods over, paid Zola rent she didn't ask for, became a silent presence that fixed broken things and asked for nothing in return. Jasper, resilient in the way of children, slowly stopped being afraid of the big, quiet man who fixed his room and taught him how to use a wrench. One evening, 6 months after the worst night of her life, Zola found Stryker on the porch, repainting the railing. "You're still here," she said. "I'm still here," he confirmed. "Deacon told you to leave the city." "He did. So why are you still here?" Stryker set down the paintbrush and looked at her directly. "Because Marcus was my brother, and I failed him. I can't bring him back. Can't undo what I let happen, but I can do what he would have done. I can protect his family. I can be the man he tried to teach me to be. 20 years too late." Zola was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded once, a small gesture of reluctant acceptance, and went back inside. Stryker returned to the railing, painting it the same bright yellow as the kitchen, adding one more splash of defiant color to the sanctuary he'd almost destroyed, but would now spend the rest of his life protecting. He'd found his family, his redemption, his home, and this time he wouldn't run. Join us in sharing meaningful stories like comment, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so every day starts with heartfelt lessons and moments that stay with you.